When Blue Ice arrived in 1985, it did not look like the kind of film the adult market was quickly becoming known for. By the middle of that decade, speed was taking over. The home video boom was changing the economics of adult filmmaking, and many productions were moving away from the older theatrical model, where a feature might still try to behave like a movie. Faster shoots, cheaper formats, and simpler structures were becoming the new rhythm. And then there was Blue Ice, a private eye mystery, an ancient book, a wealthy client, a femme fatale, escaped Nazis, hints of supernatural power, shadowy rooms, San Francisco locations, and, most surprisingly, a visual polish that made the whole thing feel like it had drifted in from an earlier, stranger moment in American exploitation cinema. It was not a mainstream thriller. It was not a respectable studio picture. And it was certainly not designed for polite conversation. But that is exactly what makes it so fascinating. Blue Ice was a film from the margins that tried, in its own peculiar way, to build a world. Directed by Phillip Marshak, the film came from a filmmaker already associated with genre hybrids. Marshak had directed Dracula Sucks, a film that mixed adult cinema conventions with classic horror iconography, and Cataclysm, a supernatural horror project that later became connected to the patchwork anthology Night Train to Terror. In other words, Marshak was not simply working in one lane. He seemed drawn to the unstable borderlands between pulp storytelling, horror, exploitation, and theatrical showmanship. That matters when looking at Blue Ice, because the movie only makes sense if you see it as a gamble on tone. On paper, the story sounds almost impossible to balance. Herschel Savage plays Ted Singer, a San Francisco private eye hired by a wealthy eccentric to find a rare and mysterious book. That book is said to contain extraordinary power, and Singer soon discovers he is not the only one searching for it. A secret group of escaped Nazis still clinging to old dreams of domination also wants the artifact. Around Singer are figures who seem pulled from several different movies at once. Jacqueline Lorians as Messina, Jamie Gillis as the wealthy big man, Reggie Nalder as General Stuttgart, and a supporting cast that includes Paul Thomas, Shanna McCullough, Ron Jeremy, William Margold, and Helga Sven. That cast list alone tells you something about the film's strange ambition. Blue Ice was not built around anonymous bodies moving through disconnected scenes. It assembled recognizable adult industry performers, then placed them beside Reggie Nalder, a distinctive character actor whose face had appeared in films such as The Man Who Knew Too Much and Mark of the Devil. Nalder's presence gives the movie a peculiar charge. He does not belong to the usual machinery of the genre, and that is exactly why he works. He makes the Nazi subplot feel like it wandered in from a European horror film and refused to leave. But the real surprise of Blue Ice is not the plot. The plot is too bizarre, too pulpy, and too inconsistent to carry the film by itself. The surprise is the craft. Vinegar Syndrome's later Blu-ray release made one thing clear. Blue Ice was preserved from its original 35mm camera negative and restored in 2K. That detail changes how the film is understood. This was not just a throwaway video era product. It was photographed in a widescreen 1.8 5:1 frame, with enough care in lighting, atmosphere, and location work that modern reviewers have repeatedly singled out how good the picture looks. Cinematographer Ace Peacock gives the film a visual discipline that the material almost does not deserve, and that tension becomes part of its charm. Smoke-filled interiors, noir lighting, seedy urban spaces, and sharply staged rooms all help create the feeling of a detective thriller that has been bent out of shape by exploitation fantasy. The San Francisco locations, in particular, give the movie texture. They open the film beyond the usual closed-room feeling of adult production and make Singer's investigation feel like it exists in a larger, dirtier city. That is where the pressure inside Blue Ice begins to show, because the movie is constantly trying to be more than one thing. It wants to be a noir, it wants to be an adventure story, it wants to be a supernatural mystery, it wants to be an adult feature, and it wants to borrow the menace of post-war conspiracy thrillers, where old fascist ghosts still lurk under modern surfaces. Any one of those ideas could have supported a small genre picture. Together, they create something unstable. The pacing is part of that instability. Later reviews have described the film as deliberate, sometimes slow, but also unusually atmospheric. That slowness can feel strange if you come to it expecting a simple genre machine. But as a piece of fringe filmmaking, it tells us something important. Blue Ice still believes in mood. It still believes in conversations, entrances, shadows, costumes, and locations. It still believes that an audience might follow a story, even a wild one, if the film gives them enough atmosphere to live inside. That belief was becoming harder to sustain in 1985. Adult cinema had once flirted with theatrical legitimacy during the so-called golden age of the 1970s, when some films tried to compete as features, not just as products. But by the mid-1980s, the economics were shifting. Home video rewarded speed and quantity. The older dream of the adult feature as a full cinematic experience was fading. And this is the hidden story of Blue Ice. It was made at the tail end of a disappearing idea. It is not valuable because it is perfect. It is valuable because it preserves the moment when filmmakers in a disreputable corner of the business were still trying to borrow the language of Hollywood genre cinema. Marshak and his collaborators were working with limited resources and sensational material, but they treated the frame as if it mattered. They staged scenes as if mood mattered. They cast performers as characters, not just bodies. They let the film become ridiculous, but they did not let it become shapeless. That is why the movie's later restoration feels like the final twist in its story. For years, Blue Ice was easy to dismiss as another obscure 1980s adult title, buried under forgettable video packaging and remembered, if at all, as a bizarre curiosity. Then, Vinegar Syndrome restored it from the original 35mm negative and presented it as an artifact worth preserving. Not cleaned up into respectability, but allowed to be seen clearly. The grain, the lighting, the locations, the eccentric performances, the whole strange design. That restoration did not turn Blue Ice into a lost masterpiece. It did something more interesting. It revealed that even a deeply marginal film can carry evidence of ambition. It showed that craft can survive in places where most viewers never thought to look. And it reminded modern audiences that film history is not made only by classics, awards, and studio legends. Sometimes it is hidden in strange genre experiments that barely held together, made by people working fast, working outside respectability, but still reaching for atmosphere, story, and style. In the end, Blue Ice remains a strange object, part detective story, part occult fantasy, part exploitation artifact, part late-night fever dream from the fading edge of theatrical adult cinema. It is messy, it is uneven, it is often absurd, but it is not careless, and that may be the reason it still lingers. Because beneath all the pulp, all the shadows, and all the impossible plot turns, Blue Ice captures a very specific moment in movie history. A moment when even the most unlikely productions could still imagine themselves as cinema.